Racism is awful, and it should be stamped out wherever it rears its ugly head. But I think we can all agree that the demand for racism has started to exceed supply. There's now a whole swathe of celebrities complaining about racism when it didn't even happen. The best example of this was Jussie Smollett. Remember him? A pampered Hollywood actor who wanted to feel the raw hatred of racism so much that he organised his own lynching. He employed two men, Abimbola Osundairo and Olabinjo Osundairo, to attack him. Now, I've been all over this big, beautiful world of ours, and I have never met a white supremacist called Abimbola or Olabinjo. Sorry. It's a funny line. Or Olabinjo. Jussie hired two Nigerian lads to beat him up, pour bleach on him, and put a noose round his neck. Now, Jussie is gay, so maybe if he went to certain parts of Africa, that might very well be the outcome. But not in Chicago. Chicago is so gay that it's even got one of the most popular musicals in history named after it. And Elton John in the middle of a 12-man gangbang is straighter than a musical. But at least Jussie believes in diversity and hired Nigerians for the role of white supremacists. Because if the 21st century has taught us anything, it's that you can identify as anything you want. Men can identify as women. Women can identify as men. And two massive Nigerian lads can identify as members of the KKK. Racism doesn't just mean being hateful and discriminatory to minorities anymore. Racism can also just mean being white in the same room as someone who isn't white. BBC radio presenter Nahal Arthanayaki has said an overwhelmingly white working environment is affecting his mental health. I know how he feels. Last week, I went into a Caribbean restaurant and noticed I was the only white person there. As a result of my horrendous experience, I had a breakdown and was carted off to the loony bin. It was very upsetting being carried out of Rasta Jimmy's chicken shack wearing a straitjacket while screaming the words, "Black, black, black, my eyes." It was awful. I'll never be the same again. When I was released back into the community, I got my lawyer to send the restaurant a strongly worded email explaining that when I have my goat curry with rice and peas, I need to have a white person to look at as it calms me down. If there's no white people in a place, I start to feel a bit anxious, the way a dog does if its owner leaves it outside a supermarket for too long. It reminded me of that awful time I went on holiday to Namibia. When my plane landed, I immediately had a breakdown and had to be taken home by air ambulance. I was signed off work for the rest of the year and had an exclusion order implemented so that black people couldn't come within a 10-meter radius of me. It's the only way to stop racism. Obviously I'm joking, but Nahal sadly wasn't. The insane thing about his complaint is that there is an over-representation of ethnic minorities in the BBC. 42% of the BBC's employees are from an ethnic minority background, and only 18% of the UK population are ethnic minorities. The BBC is now so diverse that all straight white men are identifying as neurodivergent just to get a foot in the door. Although if Nahal is surrounded by autistic men, I can understand why he might feel uncomfortable. It's never easy sharing a space with men who see the world in the same way as the Terminator. There's nothing millionaire celebrities love more than pretending that they're a victim. The queen of this, or should I say Duchess, is Meghan Markle. Meghan represents the American dream. She came from a normal background, became a Hollywood actress, and then married a prince. That is the journey most little girls and gay men dream about. Yet Meghan sees victimhood at every turn. Apparently speculating on the colour of her unborn baby is racism. It's not racism. There is no one on this planet who isn't fascinated by what the offspring of a mixed-race woman and a ginger would look like. Who wouldn't want to see what an Afro tangerine looks like? My bet is that even though the kid might have curly hair and be a quarter black, it won't be able to get a tan. 2 minutes in the sun and it'd come back looking like a really angry pimple. James Hewitt's ginger genes are very strong. Meghan and Harry have monetized this egregious remark into podcasts and Netflix series, making their persecution seem as horrific and vile as apartheid South Africa. There were even rumours that little Archie would have to use a different water fountain at Buckingham Palace. Archie is going to be just fine. He's rich, descendant of royalty, and he's white. Of course he's white. He's called Archie, for heaven's sakes. It doesn't get much whiter than that. It's not like they called him Daquan, although that would have been hilarious. but not as funny as if they'd called him Mohammed. Now that really would have given Charles an aneurysm. Imagine hearing the words, "Arise King Dequan Mohammed I." It'll be worth it just to see the Daily Mail headlines. The most egregious example of the race card being played is when Bill Cosby's legal team overturned the numerous convictions against him and declared it justice for Black America. Now, Black America has faced many horrific historical injustices, but I don't think Bill Cosby being convicted of horrendous sexual offences is one of them. I can't imagine that many black people saw Bill Cosby's trial and went, "We lost a good man there." More people would trust their teenage daughter with O.J. Simpson than Bill Cosby. Although Cosby's so old now that if he did try and put Riponol in your drink, he'd forget which one it was and end up date raping himself. That's the problem with being a prolific sex offender. It's a young man's game. The other awful thing about the sex offender community is that women are disgustingly underrepresented. Until we have females offending at the same rate as males, then we'll be continuing to live in a patriarchy. As we all know, there is no difference between men and women. So why aren't there more female sex offenders? And by the way, the odd PE teacher shagging their 16-year-old pupil ain't gonna cut it. Up your game, ladies. We all know that racism still exists, but thankfully it's dying a slow and painful death. The horrible events of the previous centuries will hopefully be a thing of the past. And if racism wasn't dying out, then would a gay black man really need to pay a couple of crap actors to organise a lynching? But then if Anne Boleyn, wife of Henry VIII, can be played by a black actress, then why can't Abimbola and Olabinjo be white supremacists? And if reality doesn't matter, then maybe Meghan is right to be offended by an innocuous inquiry into the colour of her unborn child. And maybe convicting one of the most notorious celebrity rapists is an act of racism. To paraphrase a great man, it's progress, Jim, just not as we know it. Before you go, give me a minute to tell you about our partners Give, Send, Go. Do you remember the Canadian trucker protests in 2022, where thousands of Canadians came out to protest COVID restrictions and vaccine mandates? Now, these protests lasted for weeks, and the people out on the streets needed funds, as any grassroots protest would. So people set up online crowdfunding campaigns which raised millions of dollars. Incredible! But those campaigns were closed down, and the money didn't get to the protesters because the Canadian authorities started to criticise the crowdfunding platforms, ramping up pressure on them to close the campaigns. The biggest crowdfunding platform, the one we've all heard of, completely capitulated to the demands. Now, this is where our partners Give, Send, Go come in. They stepped in when the other platforms backed off and raised millions of dollars for the truckers. When they were criticised and dragged through the Canadian courts, Give, Send, Go came out and said, quote, "They respect diverse views and believe hope and freedom are values worth fighting for. This is why we're proud to partner with them." So, if you need to crowdfund for whatever means the most to you, then don't go to the big tech platforms. We recommend you do it on Give, Send, Go. Starting a campaign on Give, Send, Go is easy and intuitive. Go to givesendgo.com today. That's givesendgo.com to start raising money for whatever's important to you. If you like this monologue, and I know you did, check out another one I did called Porn Stars for Palestine.